Today is Thursday, June 5th, 2025, and you have found the Living Youth Podcast. My name is John Robinson. I'm here again with my podcast co-host, Mr. Wallace G. Smith. Mr. Smith, you've just returned from areas that seem really far away in Minnesota and Wisconsin. How was your visit?
It was wonderful, actually. We stayed with the Mr. and Mrs. Mark Sandor and their family, which probably listening to this weekend. Thank you guys very much. You're wonderful hosts, as always. Love spending time with you and your kiddos and with all the brethren there. Super friendly, just very kind, very generous to me and my wife. We had a wonderful, wonderful Pentecost weekend.
Our topic today, something I struggled with a little bit growing up in the church, talking about how to watch world events. Give us a little more detail on what we're going to discuss this morning.
You hit right at it. Is difficult to watch world events these days. On one hand, it's almost not difficult to know about world events. Our social media feeds, everything we're looking at is constantly shoving world news in our face. Even on my phone, if I accidentally swipe the wrong way, suddenly it's showing me Apple News and it's listing all these things. But how do we think rightly about it? And it can be complicated. We say these things to you if you're young and in the church, and then you think, oh yeah, I got to think about it prophetically. And well, how do I think about all this? I think today, Mr. Robinson and I can break it down for you. We're going to talk about what it means to watch world news and to do so with your biblical head on straight. So you think about it rightly, you don't fall into the ditches, and you actually watch world news with understanding. So that's what we're talking about today.
That sounds great. Let's get into it.
Thanks for sticking with us through the music. In fact, maybe I should even say thanks for sticking with us through whatever things I failed to edit out that may have been at the beginning. We continue to get kind comments from those who say, hey, y'all kind of messed up the podcast editing a couple of episodes ago, or if not y'all, you specifically, Smith, messed it up, because I did. I do apologize. If you do listen to it, it all makes sense. But what we've been doing here, and is what I tried to do there without Mr. Robinson, his mere presence is enough to help me focus, get my life right.
So you're saying I anchor the show.
You anchor the show and my brain. So we've been trying to work on, I think we've mentioned several podcasts ago that Mr. Weston is interested in aiming a podcast towards the world and the, say younger audience at this point, it could just be under 40, younger audience in the world. And so as we've been doing these, working on some demos, we've been recording multiple different intros, because, in the intro, we're not going to talk about growing up in the church or anything like that. And so in doing that, I tried to do that, I guess, a couple of times ago. But in my hasty editing, I ended up leaving some of those in there, like one or two of those, one of those in there. And as a result, some people thought, were there two intros? What's going on? Plus, we had a big announcement here in the building that we get every day saying they're about to close the building in half an hour.
That is distracting.
It is, but at the same time, and we worry that it shows up on the podcast. I kind of have evidence now, I guess, that it doesn't, because it came on and I made a note to myself. You can say, oh, I need to come back and edit that out. Well, you don't hear the announcement, but you do hear me muttering to myself like a crazy person, I need to come back and edit that out. So anyway, thank you for letting us know about those faulty spots. I might want to take it out, just remove that episode. At the same time, it's had so many positive comments. Well, and then the number sequence is thrown off. Then people wonder what happened to 148.
The mathematician in you could not handle.
That's right.
A sequence.
I think I would have to go and just edit those parts out and then reload a new one as episode 148 and have everyone wonder, well, wow, why are there so few views on 148? That must have been really a bad one. But regardless, that might be better than being cursed forever with it. All your kindness. We're not knocking you for telling us. If anything, everyone who's let us know about it, it just helps us to know, man, people are listening. They actually care about the program. So thank you.
And everybody's so nice when they approach it. Hey, so just want to let you know. It's very nice.
They've always been so kind to us. And this really is just kind of a two-man operation. So it's not like it's a lot of people working on it. So we do thank you very much for being invested.
Let me sit you up here, Mr. Smith.
Please do.
I
Cue it
just talked
up.
over you. Sorry about that.
I try to say, cue it up. I was going to try to use a sports term, but let's be honest. I don't really know any sports terms. So just do what you're going to do.
Sports terms.
I know some. Home run.
Tee it up.
Hey, there you go. Tee it up. All right, thank you.
Okay. I like this topic a lot because growing up in the church, and you just.
Well, you're encouraged to watch
Yeah.
Watch the news.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I'm like, well, what does that really look like? Do I need to read back when there was papers? Okay. I know there's technically still a newspaper, but like back when that was still a way people got their news, read the newspaper in the morning, watch the evening news. I would watch Crossfire when that was a thing on CNN, and I would delve into politics, which I thought was kind of interesting. And after a while, I realized I don't think that's exactly what we have in mind. I think some clarity for our younger listeners in particular, and maybe it would still have some benefit to some of our older listeners. We know who you are. You introduce yourselves to us all the time. I love it. It's so nice. But what are some good guidelines with it? I mean, and it's like a fire hose of news these days, even compared to how it was growing up in the 80s and 90s. How do we get a handle on the volume of news, and how do we, I don't want to say interpret it, but there is a sense of that. Like, how do we wade through it and find out, hey, this is actually an important thing, and this isn't? I might even just reference back to our podcast we did just a few back, where we talked about Germany actually rearming is one of the first really, really notable news items that we've heard in a while that would indicate a shift in prophecy.
Yeah, and I'm sure that'll come up in the topics we're going to talk about based on what we've put together, because that is very much related. I mean, it's a good example of what we're going to be talking about today. You really are right. It used to be, well, I got to, what program should I watch? What should I read? Today, it is as if news is being shot towards us like water out of a fire hose. What you said earlier is exactly right. And you could talk about trying to drink in the news. It's like drinking from a fire hose. There's so much. And what's far more important than seeking out the news these days, what you have to have straight is, how do I think about it? How do I approach the news? How am I supposed to deal with it? Because if you're just kind of diving into it all without that mindset, well, it's easy to get lost. It's easier to get inundated and overwhelmed. But if you have the right mindset, not only does it actually help you in terms of to think about it, which is the most important thing, but even helps you decide what to pay attention to, right? Because there's a lot of different news sources out there. And if we actually wanted to try to keep tabs on all of it, your brain would explode. There's just too much. So we're going to focus on how to think about it properly, and then actually think about it properly does help you to guide a bit in terms of what kind of sources do you even look for. And before we dive into the actual meat of the focus of our podcast today, I do want to highlight Mr. Ames's last booklet. Before Mr. Richard Ames died, he had written the booklet Understanding Bible Prophecy. And I would say for anyone who's taking their first big dive into, prophecy, I want to understand prophecy. I want to understand what's going on in the world, and I want to think about it in terms of prophecy. Mr. Ames's booklet is fantastic. It goes through, for instance, or the earliest part of the booklet goes into the 4 purposes of prophecy. Like, why does God even do prophecy to begin with? Why is it all that important? Well, he talks about the 4 purposes. He gives the end time prophetic milestones. In fact, I think it's in the middle of the booklet. Makes sense. It'd be a center spread. We have a beautiful chart there designed here in our amazing editorial department with Mr. Ben Graham working under Mr. John Robinson across the table from me. A beautiful diagram to help you understand the key prophetic milestones, which will play into what we talk about today. And then Mr. Ames goes into 4 keys for understanding prophecy. How do you actually properly understand what the Bible is saying about prophecy? So anyway, we're not going to cover those things. We're not going to go over the ground that Mr. Ames covers so skillfully in his booklet. But by all means, do go get that booklet. If you don't have it already in your house, everything's available for free on tomorrowsworld.org. Just go out and grab it.
Well, and another one that really helped me, this is probably in my mid or late 20s, is I was really trying to do my due diligence and get a handle on the overall prophetic arc and understanding it. Because you read through and a beast is depicted this one way, and then it's depicted in another, and then it has a rider on it, and others don't. And I think that the Beast of Revelation booklet does an excellent job of categorize them and explaining why they're depicted the way they are. That's another one I would recommend.
Yeah, that's the Beast of Revelation myth, metaphor, or soon coming reality. It's kind of a long title, but absolutely. And Mr. Gwynn just lays things out, Mr. John Gwynn, so well in that booklet. In fact, you've kind of touched on one of the first things we wanted to share about And that is, if you're trying to have your head on straight, you're trying to think biblically about what's going on in the world, and you're trying to bring in prophecy, then focusing on the broader arc of prophecy versus getting lost in the minutia is the right way to go.
Mm-hmm.
It is very easy. Even historically, over the decades in the church, we've been tempted to be drawn in here and there and trying to think about these tiny little details. Look at this guy who's running Germany now. Maybe he's the beast. Maybe he's the one. And looking at every little decision, or trying to narrow down some of the timelines in terms of, exactly what year, is this going to happen in? And it's not that there can't be some profit to doing some of that kind of stuff. And yet at the same time and time again, it is not proven nearly as profitable as focusing on the broader trends from the perspective of the larger arc of prophecy. And I thought your example that you'd listed here that we could talk about was a really good idea in terms of, maybe I'm thinking of a later point. But in terms of, for instance, what we know the four horsemen explain, what's going to come first? There's going to be a powerful religion that's going to come, and looking for that. What's going to come later? This large war-making power, and not worrying about the details. Yep. When you look at the overall broad, let's some examples of obsessing over kind of the details about the how, this and that. I've already mentioned trying to say, is this guy the beast? Is that guy the beast? Trying to, look at all the world power. He ought to be alive now. So which guy is it? And you go into their genealogy. I've seen people go into, the family line of different ones, et cetera. It's like, wow, that's exciting. Maybe. Right. You look at all the different organizations and non-governmental organizations, and they do have very outsized influence here and there. Well, I think this organization might be doing this, or I think this organization developed it. Well, yeah, maybe. I'm not trying to say that the such things aren't in play, but at the same time, at least in my experience, Mr. Robinson, I have found that those who obsess too much on those details, over time, they begin to be, I'm going to say the word possessed. I don't mean that like a demon possession, but as like an idea possession. They seem to be possessed more by the idea that they've fallen in love with about this individual or about this institution. And next thing you know, they're focusing so much on those institutions or those individuals or those developments that they've actually lost sight of what the Bible talks about. It's like being sucked into the wrong thing in the wrong direction. Does that make any sense?
Yes. You and I have a phrase we use often, and I don't think we're the only ones, but we say, yes, 100%. My response here is 100%.
100%, Mr. Robinson. I say that way too often on this podcast even.
I was actually on one of my drives from Texas coming back to Charlotte, and I was listening to a podcast, and the podcaster said that Carl Jung had this saying, which was, people don't have ideas, ideas have people. And it really hit me. In fact, we were near the Welcome Center coming into Georgia, and we had to pull off anyway, and I remember just walking around the parking lot just mind blown by that idea, and it really is true. People think, and I've seen it. Like, I've even done it myself a little bit, but I tend to not obsess about these kind of things, and I'm not patting myself on the back. It's just not as interesting to me. Mm-hmm. But I remember us speculating 25 years ago, same thing, well, the man of sin's got to be alive right now, and he's going to probably be German, and you try to narrow it down to these families that have these lines and everything. But I have seen, and you've seen, people that just get really obsessed with certain things, and they're kind of obsessed with an idea. And it really, when you get pulled in that much, I do think it begins to kind of blind you to the broader picture. And when God gives us keys, he gives us clear, big items that are difficult to miss. Things like, and we go back to this all the time, the armies surrounding Jerusalem and the abomination of desolation, things that we can't miss, things that are clear signs. Everything else is a bit of us just trying to interpret just day-to-day news cycle items that may or may not have a meaning. I mean, I can go back, like I would do this, and I've heard others do it, but hey, there might be a new prime minister in such and such a country, and all this kind of thing, and boy, the holy days are coming up. Maybe this is going to be a big thing, and like 30 years later, I'm still here, and now we're podcasting. Who knew that was coming? But my point is, like, all my speculation from 25 years ago, pointless.
Right.
Almost pointless.
Right. Oh, I think that's a great point.
I do. I might even fold in one of our other ideas with this. You're kind of talking about it. I remember in the 80s when CNN became the first 24 hours news channel. So
Yeah.
CNN was cable news network. And, they at first I think struggled a little bit to really have a proper 24-hour news cycle. But now that is just a given. And I think that's, in my observation, that's actually not been good for us, good for humanity in general. Like, it was better when we would just get news periodically. And then I know from listening to other journalists talk about it, well, with the 24-hour news cycle, if you're trying to break news, like, you don't have time to vet everything.
Right.
So the news in some way is ironically even more unreliable than it's ever been because people are just rushing to get information out there. And if it's wrong, well, it's not always retracted or corrected. But anyway, I tried to follow the news because I thought that's what we should do. And I realized over time there's a little bit of nuance to when God commands us to, watch world events and know what's going on. For myself personally, I realized that did not mean obsessing over the news every day.
Right. And that's so crucial what we're trying to say. I won't say 100%. I'll just say, you're right. It is easy. If you wanted to obsess over the news 24 hours, that's just it. It's now been created to do that. And if you're not careful, news can become an idol for you. It become, I'm watching world news. I'm watching world news and it's like, who didn't watch the news that intensely were the disciples. I mean, they didn't, and they were invested. Jesus Christ himself had told them what's going to happen. We have to not get caught up in all these little details. And the more you obsess on the news, almost the more you have to focus on details, because that's kind of all there is to look at, versus an overall arc of prophecy. Allow the broader things that we teach about what to expect. Mr. Ames, again, in the booklet, let's talk about the milestones to look for. He is very plain about an abomination of desolation and an army surrounding Jerusalem. Let me say this. Is this current pope the one to fulfill the final? Well, let me say this: if he starts calling fire down from heaven, I'm going to be pretty sure, that's something to look for. But on the other hand, I don't know.
Yeah, otherwise we
don't even know how long his pontificate is going to last, right? So focus first on the broader arc. Keep in mind the larger things, and some of those things will come up as we go through additional points. For instance, it's a second point. It's not exactly the same. We're talking about focusing on the broader arc of prophecy, but how does that arc benefit us? I think that kind of fits here with our second point we wanted to make, and that is allowing the Bible itself to direct our attention to what is important. That is the news, and this kind of fits with the point Mr. Robinson brought up that we should talk about later, but the news will tell you what it thinks is important. The news is doing the news organizations. They're doing their best. I'm not trying to say they're all honest about things, but they have their take on what's happening, and they're giving you that. And the politicians that are involved, they have their takes. They want you to think that this is the most important element or that is the most important element. We allow the Bible to direct our attention to what's most important. I think a great case in point is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So Russia invades Ukraine, and the world is so focused on, is Russia growing in power? Is Russia a threat? What happens if it has... And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying all of that isn't important. I'm not saying that at all. But what we focused on from the beginning has what is going to be the impact on Europe? What is going to be the impact on Germany, specifically in Europe? Because we knew that was that moves prophecy forward. Guess what? Russia fights. Russia doesn't get along with other countries. Things happen. Wars happen. But not everything moves prophecy forward. Just because there's a war here or a war there, even if it's involving major powers, that doesn't mean it's necessarily moving prophecy forward. But in this case, this is a war that's on Europe's back door, if you will, and that had the potential to motivate. In fact, I have an old article, let's see if I can pull it up, by Mr. Gene Hogberg, going way back to the old Worldwide Church of God days. This is in a Good News magazine, but 1981. I was a wee lad of 11, Mr. Robinson. Yeah. And he was highlighting in this about, let's see, and in fact, I wouldn't have even gotten this one because I didn't get literature until I was 14. But he was highlighting in this article about the difference between how we understand things. And this is 1981, so you're going back more than 40 years. And he talks about how, for all these different things, how there's the church's perspective, then there's the overall perspective of the world, and how they don't understand the things we understand. As a result, like they don't understand the identity of America and Britain. They understand what's actually important in terms of moving things towards the future. And so here's him talking. It's almost like you could see this exact thing today. Oh boy, let's see if I can actually find where he says it. He talks about our understanding. He says this understanding that we have is so vital in comprehending world events today that without it, we're left prophetically rudderless. But with this understanding, we can readily grasp the portent behind at that time, one of the most significant trends in the world over the past 2 decades, the decline of American and British power and prestige, and the corresponding rise in the military might of the Soviet Union. Now, we know from this perspective that America's death was prematurely. I mean, really, it continued to rise, if anything, rise in power since 1981.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
eventually the Soviet Union would crumble, right? But here's why what he was saying is exactly right, because he said these trends, this major trend affects nearly everything in the world today, from changed power relationships in the Middle East to chaos in the global economic structure to the need for Europe to unite. Notice, even back in 1981, he was evaluating those things not because they themselves are significant, but how are they impacting the broader picture? The Bible tells us to look to Europe eventually to unite. Look for changing relationships in the Middle East. Look at how things affect the status of the United States and Britain in the world. And when you have that consistent thing where the Bible is directing our attention, then it gives you a sense of ordering
Yep.
things. You don't have to feel like you're lost in the chaos of world news. You've got specific things to look for.
You know, the kind of the two things we're told to watch is essentially Europe and also Jerusalem, which is understandable. But I have an example, I think, and we'll see if people agree with this or not. But something that happened when I was young that was kind of a big deal, and I remember the adults talking about it considerably, and it was scrutinized for perhaps being
Having significance.
important, prophetic fulfillments, which was when Egyptian President Anwar Sadat was assassinated in 1981. Ironically, 1981, right? Why was he assassinated? Well, in 1978, he signed the Camp David Accords, which would have been Carter, right? And President Jimmy Carter. And it recognized the state of Israel as a nation. It was the first Arab country to do that. And so there were people within Egypt that were super unhappy about this, and they 3 years later managed to assassinate him. So this was kind of a big deal. Here's Israel's part of this because, they're recognized as a nation, and things are the shifting sands of Middle Eastern politics and geopolitical stances and all these kinds of things. Well, what ultimately happened? Well, he was succeeded by President Hosni Mubarak, who was the president for the next 30 years until he was removed in the Arab Spring. So my point is, did any of this factor into where we are now? Obviously, it does. Did it have any end time significance? I would actually argue no.
In terms of the incident itself or
Yes.
something,
Yeah.
right? It was just more a small part of a larger.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
It did not have a large prophetic significance to it. Leaders are assassinated all the time. Israel's own prime minister was assassinated in the 2000s sometime. I forget which one that was. And there's turnover, there's wars, there's conniving, there's all these assassinations and things, and that sometimes just is real life. I mean, that's just what's happening, and it doesn't have a larger prophetic significance. What does is some of the things we've talked about already. I know I've used this as an example before, but I think a great example of this where the church, I don't want to, prediction's not the right word, but the church was, Mr. Armstrong was on the record forever saying that, at the end of World War II, Germany was separated into Eastern and Western Germany. And Mr. Armstrong had always said that they would eventually be reunited. Why do we think that? Because we understand who the Germans are anciently as the Assyrians, and they were going to be unified eventually to fulfill their role in the broader fulfillment of prophecy in the 10 nations and all that kind of thing. And so I think that was a good example, but it was really a big picture arc when you think about it.
Right. You mentioned What you say makes me think of China in terms of interpreting things not just based on the attention that the world seems to give it, but also interpreting things in the broader picture. We see the rise of China. We see concerns about that, them building a military. I mean, building their military. They already have one, of course, trying to come up with trying to compete with the U.S. as a major global power to be reckoned with. It kind of reminds me of Mr. Hogberg's article there, that when he was talking about the rise of the Soviet Union, but the power of the Soviet Union, but what do we focus on? We let the Bible direct our attention to what's most important. And so the rise of China, the question is, how does that impact things prophetically? We don't just think of it as, maybe we'll be living in a future world that's all Chinese. No, that's not going to happen. The prophecy clearly doesn't say that. Might it impact a diminishing of America's role in the world? Well, yeah, we had a recent news and prophecy item. I don't think it was this week. I think it was last week. I could be wrong. When you're editing them, you can't remember what order they're in all the time. But talking about how China was reaching out to other nations here on our side of the world to try to create deals and agreements. I think Central America and such. If you look at the Monroe Doctrine way back when, that was kind of America's policy, is that we're not going to let other parts of the world have an influence in the Americas. This is our hemisphere, and you see a reduction, but again, the Bible focusing what's important. What is the impact on the broader picture? The kings of the East eventually need to find cause to work together. So letting the Bible focus us on what's important. You had a comment in our notes that I thought was really important.
Well, right.
Because some things the world doesn't think is all that significant. And the Bible does highlight that. And what was the example that you highlighted there?
Well, it was going back a few months ago. I think we actually ended up podcasting about this, didn't we? Talking about the white horse.
White horse. Mm-hmm.
And you gave a great sermon about it. And it was kind of the realization that what was dominating world news at the time was, with the Ukraine and Russia fighting, and the possibility that it would spread into other areas was increasingly troubling. And NATO let's say NATO has not been a peacemaker really so far in this whole thing, but that's not the point. The big point was, we could be in a huge fight, and the horses riding and this whole thing. It's like, wait, no, what comes first? The white horse. So that's a way we would really make a distinction between the Church of God, Living Church of God, and what mainstream Christians teach, which is they're aware of the four horsemen, but there's still confusion over what the white horse represents among some. But before all these other events can happen, we need widespread religious deception too, like on a grander scale than what we've seen. And
that's why you'll notice our cover article for the July-August Tomorrow's World coming out in July. We sent it to the printer just day before yesterday, or yesterday actually. In this case. Yep. The cover article is about the Pope and about the new Pope Leo XIV, and the title on the cover is, I think, Why the Pope Matters. Why, whether you're Catholic or not Catholic, it's irrelevant. In terms of prophecy, it's important to watch the papacy. The world, they certainly watch because, the Pope's an important person. What's he going to do? But they don't understand the full significance. And so to wrap up this point, we have to allow the Bible to direct our attention, not to allow the world to drive what we think is important or not, but allow the Bible to direct our attention. The third point that we wanted to comment on in terms of trying to keep our biblical heads on and understanding world news and bringing in prophecy is to make sure that we allow the Bible to interpret the news and not vice versa. To allow the Bible to tell us what world events might signify versus allowing world events to start to color our view of the Bible.
Yes.
And it's so easy to do that, even accidentally. And that is, it can creep up on you that you're doing that if you're not careful.
Well, I like here in our notes, like one of the greatest examples of this is the mark of the beast. You go back, people outside the church have been aware of the mark of the beast.
Yeah, it's a prominent thing in the Bible. Right?
And, people in the 60s and 70s where your social security number might be the mark of the beast. Right. And just like all these ideas.
I remember being at my grandmother's house in Kentucky, and she had a book. I don't know where she got it, bookstore, but it was about barcodes. Barcodes are the mark of the beast. If you look at some codes, there's a 6 at the front, a 6 at the end, a 6 in the middle, and that's That's the mark. And as a kid, I didn't know any better. I
Did
thought,
they
oh,
really?
that's it. Oh, yeah.
No, I knew that was a thing. I didn't know they really have 6s on them.
Well, let me say some of the barcodes they illustrated did, because they had to break the numbers up into 2 groups. You don't really see that on barcodes anymore.
Well, fact check. That's not the mark of the beast.
And
and more recently, when COVID broke out, there was some chatter on social media about, well, maybe these vaccines are going to be the mark of the beast. And if you allow yourself to like kind of disconnect from being biblically grounded, you could think, well, I don't know, maybe that is. Except that in the church we know what the mark of the beast is. We've taught what it is for a while. What is the mark of the beast? It's a sign of disobedience that warrants God's wrath being poured out. It's enforced Sunday worship. Which booklet do we talk about that in?
Oh boy, well, we talk about that in the Beast booklet, and we have a lot of telecast on it. If you just go to our YouTube channel for Tomorrow's World and do a search on Mark of the Beast, you're going to get multiple. In fact, I think we even have a whiteboard on it now. If we do have I'll make a note. If we do have a whiteboard on it, I'll try to add that to the page. But yeah, we have a whiteboard on it. It's Sunday worship. It's enforced Sunday worship. That is the mark of the beast. So is it vaccines? No. Is it barcodes? No. Now, that doesn't mean that some things like Mr. Rod McNair has a good article from later 2020, early 2021 about the changes in tech that the beast power could use, for its efforts. And sure enough, barcodes could be that. All sorts of biometrics could be a part of that. But that doesn't make any of that the mark of the beast. The mark of the beast is the form of worship. It is Sunday worship, and it's not those things.
When you take the mark of the beast, you're really directly in conflict with God.
Right. You've taken one of his signs
Yes.
about his people, set it aside, and embraced a completely different sign.
Yeah. Read the rest of Revelation. It doesn't go well for the people to take the mark of the beast. But I think
kind of a
this
spoiler.
but I do think this is a great example. And you made such a good point. There could be mechanisms that are associated with this enforcement, and things can be nefarious, but you can disregard everything that anybody says that's the mark of the beast that you hear, because you know what the mark of the beast is, which is being willing to go in coerced into enforced Sunday worship, or even just accepting it, not even being coerced.
Right, exactly right. Those things are, I've often, especially with the growth of AI and with other things going on, I've often thought, I don't think they're going to need much at all to be able to track people and know their habits and such. I mean, Google has already, if you use Google in any way, it knows so much about you already. You have powerful algorithms that are reading our every behaviors, are collecting all sorts of information. The idea of getting off the grid is very difficult now. It reminds me of a movie, not a recommendation, but I'm just saying I have seen it. Minority Report, Steven Spielberg, Tom Cruise, where advertising then, because they got a bunch of futurists together to talk about what could a reasonable future look like, not too far in the future, and one of them were machines that would scan your eyes to know who you are and say, oh, John Robinson, have you considered, I don't know, whatever product you'd like to buy, whatever Beats headphones or whatever, and because it knows you've been shopping and knows who you are, maybe you're interested in music. And honestly, that is really what we're getting. It's just not reading our retinas, but it does get a print of who we are. There's so many things that can be done. I feel like, again, obsessing over those things starts to become a distraction. And we need that reminder, okay, now wait, what is the mark of the beast? What is it fundamentally? The Bible does interpret itself. Actually, I say the Bible interprets itself. We put the pieces together to understand it. The Bible should be what I mean to focus on. The Bible should help us. We should use the Bible to understand what's going on in the news, not take the news and try to cram it into the Bible. Actually,
that happens a lot.
It does. Well, I use this example in TWPs a lot, but I remember a fella on 2 different occasions, 2 different fellows actually, but both of them were at a Denny's, oddly enough. Maybe one was not a Denny's. It was a Denny's-like place. But I remember a long time ago, some guy telling me, oh, I know who the beast power is. I know. Well, he didn't say beast power. That's kind of in-house talk because he was not in the church. But he said, oh, you ever read the Beast of Revelation? Yeah, I have. He goes, I know who that is. He goes, that's the Soviet Union, man. And of course, it's got to be wrong. There's no Soviet Union anymore. But he was thinking like the Iron Teeth and the Iron Curtain, and he had it all worked out. But he was just taking the news and cramming it into the Bible. And then sometime later, but still in the past, as will be obvious, another fellow says, hey, the final Antichrist, and they were confusing the Antichrist and the beast. They were talking about the beast, but he says, I know who that is. That's Saddam Hussein, right? And he was looking at Iraq and Babylon, and he was putting all this stuff together. Again, Saddam Hussein was just big in the news at the time, and he's connected in some way to the land. But we don't take the news, and because I usually, now when I bring that up at TWPs, I say, hey, if Saddam Hussein is the beast power, then he just stitch his head back to his body, because he's not being very effective right now in that role. Well, because we don't do that. We avoid that in the church. We don't take the news and try to cram it into the Bible, even when the Bible seems to contradict the news. Like it seems like the news seems to be going in the opposite direction. We don't abandon the Bible. We just know it's a matter of time before it turns around.
So that reminds me of what I think is another good example. Is Donald Trump prophetic? Well, I mean, he is the president of the United States at a critical juncture, it would seem.
If you're important in prophetic times, it's kind of hard not to be prophetic, right?
But taking the idea of Donald Trump and really forcing it back into the Bible, you and I have both seen people try to take him and fit him into scriptures. And then I've seen some now. They were sure what Donald Trump was going to do when he became president, and he was going to go do this and this and the other. And now I've seen great disappointment among some circles of people who are disappointed with the tactics he's taking and what he's doing and everything. So, is he prophetic? I don't know. I mean, he's potentially apocalyptic in some ways because you don't know what he's going to do.
Yeah, I saw Dr. Roderick Meredith had a great take on that when he was elected the first time. We all watched the inauguration, and I remember Dr. Meredith saying, he could give us more time to do the work or bring World War III even faster.
Yes.
One way,
tweet.
Yeah, exactly.
One tweet.
With one tweet. And that is such a good example, Mr. Robinson, because we get our emotions involved and we think, oh, he's got to be a good guy and we're going to put him in this role or this, that. But you know what? God is in charge and God is playing out his larger purpose. Right. And unless you really see it laid out in the Bible, you need to be open to how things actually could go. Someone complimented recently to me. I appreciate the compliment. Thank you if you're out there. On our comments on the assassination attempt on Mr. Trump, and thought that was a good example of trying to keep things in perspective. And so maybe, I don't know, maybe I can link to that podcast on our website. But
one other thing I would like to mention, and we do not have to take a lot of time on this. It's something I found, so I go from in the 80s and 90s to watching a lot of news and listening to a lot of talk radio to actually going into a period where I kind of let off for a little while, and then social media came around. And so then I get on Twitter relatively early and found that was a great way to get news. You could sign up for such and such a news agency's feed, and then they would tweet out articles, not even articles, just news items that were happening. But I really would caution, especially younger listeners who just don't have quite as much experience, be careful about obsessing over keeping up with the news, because the news is overwhelmingly negative, and it will start causing you to be anxious and depressed. And one of the ways I know this is, we have a couple things we do every year where there's a camping trip we go on often in September, and there's no coverage out there. And so for about 4 or 5 days, your phone is almost useless. And man, I tell you, not knowing what's going on in the world all the time is frankly a relief. And so that's my point is, find a good balance where you're not just every day, well, I don't know, we might a nuclear war might start because Ukraine is doing X, Y, and Z. I mean, this most recent thing really was dangerous, where the Ukraine went and bombed some of the Russia's.
Oh yeah, it was a brilliant maneuver.
Yeah. What are you going to do when the Russians feel backed into a corner and feel like they have no option and start using ballistic missiles? The point is, there's a lot of bad news going on all the time, and news agencies themselves will tell you if it bleeds, it leads. The idea
Right.
being people are to the news to hear the negative stuff, not the good and happy stuff. And if you get too caught up in it and you obsess over it will affect your mood. And so I've had to
Yeah.
moderate myself, and that's part of why I throw that caution out there.
Well, me too, Mr. Robinson. And I don't know if we made it apparent to you enough, but we've moved on to another recommended point, which is not obsessing about the 24-hour news cycle. We've talked about it earlier because it's kind of hard not to bring in. But yeah, if you want to keep your biblical head on straight, be aware of that. This is a new thing in human civilization. Never at any time have even, I would say, the leaders of kingdoms had available to them a constant feed of what's going on, and not even what's going on in your area or your country or your continent, but all over the world. And it can distort your perspective. I've known some who think, did you see what's going on in, say, such and such country over here, and this third world country here, and this, and they're thinking, oh, times are so much worse than ever. But then you look at the history of those countries, and those things have always been happening.
Yes.
That has been their sad way of life, because of corrupt governments, whatever. For decades and decades and decades, there's barely a generation there alive that knows anything other than that. But it's the first time we've just had it constantly fed to us in our news, and this 24-hour news cycle. Mr. Robinson is, I use the phrase, 100% right. My wife and I have talked about that. We've seen some things in the news, and we just look at each other and think, if it wasn't for knowing the truth, I think I would just be constantly depressed.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
No, I haven't thought that in a while, but there occasionally it hits you and you think, well, man, I can see why a lot of people are like really worried about the future, understandably, because that's kind of what the news has been pushing down on us. And then there are very real things going wrong in the United States, but not just here, other countries. We did a cover on the TW magazine where we talked about how the United Kingdom had gone through 3 prime ministers in a year and a half or 2 years, like a very short period of time, instability in the leadership position.
Yeah.
And pulling out of the EU. There's a lot of stuff going on that is worrisome. And I realized it's one of those things I think it's easy to underestimate how when you really do understand the truth and you have a good grasp on it and you really, truly believe what the Bible says and what God says about the future, well, then you kind of, at least for me, my attitude is sort of like, well, it always was going to end miserably. Like there is a future that is pretty terrible, but there's an even more like incredible future right behind it.
Right.
I was talking to my daughter, actually, my younger daughter, not that long ago. We were talking again about, we've addressed before how younger people sometimes are not excited about the end coming because they have futures and plans and want to get married and all this kind of thing. But if you think about it, when the tribulation kicks in, that's 2.5 years. The day of the Lord is 1 year. You're talking only about 3.5 years of your life, and you're on the other side. Like, I really do feel like when Christ returns and he begins to clean things up and we see the millennium come in its fullness, we really will wonder why we wanted to extend out this present miserable age.
Right. Why did we want this to last longer?
Yeah.
Yeah. That perspective. And you might think, well, okay, because I've got the biblical perspective, then I can go ahead and swim around in this 24-hour news cycle because I'm going to understand it differently. But that's the thing. If you keep listening, because you know who doesn't have that perspective? All the news people you're listening to, all the people on Twitter, all the talking heads, and because it's not just, these days it's not just anchors, and I can get to this in a second, but it's also the people that are interpreting the news and the commentators. They don't have that perspective. And so if they apply any interpretation at all, it's their own. And the idea that you can hold on to a right perspective about what's going on in the news while constantly listening to people who don't have that perspective is kind of like leavening, right? It goes in one direction. You're certainly not going to make an impact on them, but you constantly listen to them, they're going to make an impact on you. And I've mentioned this example before, and it's a small one, but when the Bush versus Gore controversy was going on in the election that led to President Bush, when he was running versus Mr. Al Gore, who had been vice president under President Clinton, it was controversy because it all boiled down to one focus on one state, Florida, and they were interpreting all these physical ballots. Like, well, this person, what they
the
didn't,
Chad.
the Chads. That's
Yeah,
right. The
yeah,
Chad
yeah.
was like the little remnant you punch out of a punch card. And it's like, well, you have some where it didn't punch all the way through. Should we interpret that as a vote? Because maybe they intended to, and we don't want to dismiss their vote. But you never know when they change their mind, right? And they decided, ooh, no, that's not the one I want to do. So you had all this lawfare going in because they realized the votes were, the count was slim enough. Whoever got Florida was going to get the whole shebang. Well, that really got me into paying attention to politics at the time, more so than I ever had. And I started reading the Wall Street Journal, a particular commentator in the Wall Street Journal whom I just love. He's just incredibly witty and just sharp, and I love his analysis. Well, it wasn't long before I found that I was starting to interpret the news the way the Wall Street Journal did, that understanding the news, I was starting to be inclined in terms of what's important, what's not, how to understand it. It was leaning more towards the editorial board of the Wall Street Journal than it really was the way the Bible tells me to interpret things. And when you're just drenched in the 24-hour news cycle, I'm not saying that you'll necessarily lose your perspective, but it can start to shift. Plus, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, the mere fact that it's a 24-hour news cycle, when news really isn't, not only is it not happening in a sense, 24 hours 7 in terms of news you need to pay attention to, but if it bleeds, it leads being the guiding principle, they're going to slant the news. How are they slanting the news? To get you to watch.
Yep.
It's what we now do with algorithms. They did with people, and they still do. Their goal is not to make you informed. Even if I'm just putting aside any kind of conspiracies, putting aside any kind of bias towards trying to lean you in a particular political direction. Even if they were, say, people of the purest intention, but they still got a news program to pay for, they still have a channel, they still have money they're trying to earn, they're going to want to put in front of you stuff that will keep you coming to them. They're going to put you they're going to put in front of you the things they think are important. And if it only is 5 minutes worth of news time, but they need half an hour, they're going to stretch that out as long as they can, talking about the 24-hour news cycle. I do believe is one of the worst inventions of our modern culture. And it just leaves you depressed and anxious, and it's good not to be a part of it.
I didn't feel that way at first. I thought it was great. It was amazing. What a world we live in, that we can monitor what's going on in the world, instantly know what's going on. And I agree. That would be a different podcast. We do not have time to explore it. But like, why did my feelings on that change? Well, we've addressed some of them already. But like a constant news cycle is not good for the human brain.
That's a really great way to put it. When I think about it, I think we were not made and designed to spend that much time digesting world news, let alone when it's coming to us already in a biased way. The last point that we wanted to cover today is I want to defer to Mr. Robinson because he put it here, and I thought it was a great point, but I want him to word it in what's on his brain. So
putting me on the spot.
I am putting you on the spot.
So here's what it's rooted in. It's rooted in, and I won't read the whole thing. I won't read it. 2 Thessalonians 2, specifically verses 9 through 12, where we are warned about a lawless one. And when this lawless one shows up, he's going to have all these, as it puts in Thessalonians, power, signs, lying wonders, and he's going to deceive a lot of people, and God is going to allow that happen. And there's going to be a worldwide delusion that makes people believe the lie, which to me would be fundamentally that the main lie is you can worship something other than God. That does not work. And God has been proving that to us for the last 6,000 years, right? So the point is, we more than ever, this has always been the case, but more than ever, as we really do feel like we're getting closer and closer to things wrapping up. There's just some things moving now that we really, if we look back to, couldn't really point at back in the the last 20 years, let's say. I mean, we can see culture shifting and things happening. But there are some things that are happening right now, especially with Germany is one of the most notable ones that are going on. That's like, well, wow, this might actually be moving into gear. We need to be grounded in what we believe and the truth, and we should be studying these booklets that go into detail about how the end time events of the end time, big picture, so that when there does become I mean, what is the scripture, Mr. Smith, that talks about some of these things are so convincing that even the elect could be deceived if that were possible?
Yeah, the devil seeks to deceive, if possible, even the elect, right? And some people interpret that to mean that it's impossible to deceive the elect. And there's a few different challenges with that. One, that's literally not how the Greek text reads. That's not what that means. That's like me saying, hey, I'm going to come to your house, if possible, by 5:00. Oh, are you saying it's not possible to be here by 5:00? No, I'm saying if it's possible, that's what I plan on doing. But also, let's even just grant that. It's, just grant that for the sake of oh yeah, maybe there are some that can't be. Well, then the temptation is to think of us as those people, and before we know it, we think, oh no, I can't be deceived. And that's dangerous thinking.
One of the things that kind of reminded me of this week, and you and I had a bit of a discussion about it, was there's a notable Catholic bishop, I think, who was on Tucker Carlson. And it was a very friendly conversation, very Catholic oriented. And it was really Tucker in some ways just kind of trying to educate himself about what the Catholic teachings were. And how would I characterize it? It was stunning how lacking in any biblical grounding in truth his take on Catholicism was. The bishop uses lots of Latin phrases, doesn't use proper definitions for Christian things. But I tell you what, Tucker was eating it up, and it sounds convincing. It sounds religious. It sounds like this, 2,000 plus year old religious system has all these trappings, and what a word, like it's impressive, and it sounds impressive, and it's not hard to see how people are going to fall into this. People are not going to carefully vet it the way you would if you were in the Church of God. It's like, well, what he's saying there doesn't make any sense because that goes against, people aren't going to hear that.
Right.
And just, again, make sure we're grounded because there's a powerful white horse. I don't know if the horse itself is powerful.
Is it a Clydesdale, the horse? Yeah.
The white horse reminds us that there is a powerful, powerful religious system coming that is going to influence the whole world, and we need to make sure we're grounded so we're not influenced by that.
Yeah. There is going to be, every world leader, all those who seek to lead tend to engage in propaganda, filter, characterize, take your enemy, make them look terrible, do whatever it takes. And for those you want to encourage, I'll make them look like heroes, make them look wonderful. We make fun of countries like, but we know countries like North Korea, where they do it institutionally in a great way. Our great leader, and you have children singing his praises versus evil Americans. Well, at the same time, what they're doing is just a more blatant version of what everybody's going to do. And it is interesting. Mr. Phil Senna, a friend of the podcast, sent an article to us this morning as we record that, about, what is it from? It's from, the Free Press, from the Free Press, freepress.com, about how Catholicism got cool. And the subhead is that young Americans and people around the world are flocking to the Catholic Church. The Free Press spoke to them to find out why. And it's interesting because some of the things, and I've seen this in my research too, some of the things that are drawing younger people to the Catholic Church, and we would like to have a larger podcast on this topic, are things that honestly the true church provides, and provides better, I would say. But they're tired of a world that's just bendable and flexible, and there is no concrete meaning, and they want rules. They actually want to know, how do you live life? What is actually right or wrong? What does it mean what is God like? And what is he not like? And they really want the things that the truth does provide. And just like the harlot, the great harlot, there's those kinds of things there that are offered, but then there's the other things as well. And I thought kind of what you're saying, at least I think it relates to this, in terms of being influenced by the media, because they're eating it up, like Tucker Carlson you're mentioning.
Yep.
I actually saw that particular bishop being taken to task a bit on Twitter this morning by some of those that are really rooting for a strong Catholic Church, because whenever he asked him about the prayer to St. Michael that used to be at the end of every traditional Latin Mass, apparently, he wasn't able to pull it off. He kind of started it or something, said, I don't want to get it wrong. And others trying to defend that bishop fellow by saying, oh, look, he's on a television or whatever. He's probably nervous. Some saying, no, man, you got to get it right. He's got to know it's the prayer to quote unquote St. Michael to defend us in battle, etc. Well, anyway, back to this. This one particular comment, she said she had just been baptized that day in the Catholic Church. And she said it was almost as if the veil between heaven and earth had been lifted.
Wow.
And it says she felt leaving, quote, more receptive to the supernatural. It's very interesting because they're being drawn by real needs this culture has. Our world has prepped them to have no concrete foundation, nothing solid, nothing, and they're starting to recognize that's a lie. I've just been told nothing but lies. But then they're susceptible to the propaganda of all this. One of them even says one of the benefits in this article, skimming it, talk about how one of the benefits of the Catholic Church is that a lot of its ceremony, ritual, and such is very photogenic. Mm-hmm. It looks great on social media, and people are drawn to that, to the sense of mystery. And so, if you really want to understand where things are going, understand the media is always even if it's not in some kind of conspiracy kind of approach. The whole purpose of media is to influence. And that's true in the news programs that we read. That's true in all the analysis, et cetera. They're all trying to influence. And that is going to be true of the institutions to come. That's going to be true of the beast power and whatever news organizations are coming out of Europe. That's going to be true of the harlot to come. And the rising harlot in terms of empower, what will eventually grow from the Catholic Church. And we have to be grounded in the truth to see through all of that. So Mr. Robinson's point about not being moved or influenced by the media and the message they're selling, we do have to be mindful of that.
It's going to feel like, to most people, like the obvious thing that we should be doing, and what's wrong with you? You know, like the pressure to conform will be enormous, and we have to. What I don't know if this is the right way of putting it, but like some people put it in terms of like you need to have a strong why. Like, why are you running this marathon? You need to have a strong like if you want to be successful, you need to have a strong why. You know, for us to resist the enormous pressure to conform to this new system, that's like, what's the problem? What's wrong? We need to have a strong why. Why are we here? Why do we believe what we believe? Why is it going to be worth, even unto death, sticking to our spiritual principles as God has given them to us?
Right. Well, we got really broad in this broadcast. I think we
really opened up.
We did. To kind of boil things back down to the basics, you do want to watch the news. You want to be mindful of what's going on. You should care about what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. You should care about developments going on in terms of the popularity of Catholicism. You should care about what's going on in the United States, our current economic problems and such. But keep your biblical head on straight while you do so, and don't be intimidated by it all. Get Mr. Ames's booklet. You need to read that. And then focus on just the broader things that we teach. Let the Bible actually direct your attention to the right things. That alone will help you filter out some of the stuff you don't need to pay attention to the stuff that you do. And make sure you're make sure you're seeking to understand how the Bible tells us to understand these things. And don't fall for those who just keep trying to cram the world's news into the Bible and try to make everything prophetic in their own way. No, just let the Bible tell you what's important. And you'll find that it won't be nearly as stressful watching the news. You won't be as anxious. You won't be as concerned in that kind of sense. But also you'll have a much better sense of what's going on than literally 99% of the rest of the world.
Smith and Robinson.